Felix. He says, Felix, under you, the place has been so peaceful. You've brought so much peace to the land. Now can you guys read that? So there's a couple of historians from that time. Tacitus, who's a Roman historian, Josephus, who's also Roman, like a Jewish Roman historian. They claim that actually Felix was a shocking administrator. He was not good, and actually there was a lot of lack of peace at the time under him. So they're starting with falsehoods. They're starting with things that are not true, that is false flattery. That's the beginning of this argument against St. Paul. Then he accuses St. Paul of a few different things. And you will see that everything he is accused of, Jesus was accused of. It's a similar set of accusations. So the way that St. Paul is accused is the way that Jesus was accused. Okay? So the first thing he accuses him of, the language that he uses, he says he's doing all these things throughout the world. He's building followers throughout the world. Okay? So this is seen, if St. Paul is building followers throughout the world, what's he doing? This is an attack on Rome. This is treason. You're trying to make yourself a leader against all-powerful Rome. And only the Roman leaders, who are the tools of the gods, can be leaders. So this St. Paul is being accused of sedition, calling himself a king kind of thing. Again, remember that that's what they accused Jesus of. Exactly the same style of accusation against Jesus. They accused him of causing unrest and chaos. Okay, and St. Paul answered to this, but he has not done any of that. But they're accusing him of unrest and chaos, which is exactly what they accused Jesus of. He's causing riots, which he never did. They're also accusing him of profaning or breaking Jewish law. Okay, so he even tried to profane the temple, so doing things against the temple, the Jewish law. So he's breaking Roman law, he's breaking Jewish law, he's breaking all the laws. All of these laws that he's broken, of course, they have one goal, is to get him to be put to death. Okay? All of these things is a reason for the Roman governors to kill St. Paul. So they have a goal to kill him. And then what he does is he lies. So that's why I brought in that story earlier of when the Jews came to arrest St. Paul, they collected him, they were violent with him. Then the Roman leaders came and because of the violence took St. Paul away from them to try him properly. Okay? So this is a false accusation here where they say that the Lysias, the Roman soldier or commander or whatever he is, took St. Paul off them violently. Because if you read chapter 21, that's not what happened. Okay? So they're making things up. And then in verse 9, which we didn't read, and the Jews also assented, maintaining that these things were so. So you have all these people saying, yeah, get him. Again, what does this remind us of? Jesus. Exactly the same. So St. Paul is being dealt with in the exact same way that Jesus has previously been dealt with. And so one thing that we start to understand is that when you work with God, you work for God, you do the work of God, you walk with him. Okay, you're going to walk the same pathway that God walked. So it's not unusual then for St. Paul to deal with a whole set of similar accusations and ways of being dealt with that Jesus was dealt with. It's not unusual. It's not unexpected. In fact, it's a sign that St. Paul is walking with God, that he is one of God's people. It is the same with us. When we work with God, if my life is embedded in God, we can expect that you can have difficulties, you can have misunderstandings. People don't really understand your way of thinking, the way you do things. They misinterpret you and even attack, and falsely, accusations that are not true. We can expect this, especially the more work you do with God, the more this will be the case. If you read the lives of the saints, there's almost no saint that hasn't been misunderstood or attacked or for the way they function. Pope Carlos was attacked for the way he functions. Mother Teresa was attacked for the way she functions. Ambar Brahm was attacked for the way he functioned. Every one of them, because these people were working the work of God. And so we can expect that if we do the work of God, that we will also walk with him. Okay, and that pathway is clear. Jesus has made it clear. He says, you're going to follow me, you're going to carry a cross, you're going to be crucified, and you'll be glorified, but you'll carry the cross too. And so it's not unexpected that St. Paul is walking this pathway and being accused in the exact same way that Jesus was. Any questions on that so far? So that's the accusations set against Paul, ready for him to be killed. Is that clear? All right, now we'll read verse 10 to 21, which is Paul's defense of himself. Then Paul, after the governor had nodded to him to speak, answered, "Inasmuch as I know that you have been for many years a judge of this nation, I do the more chiefly answer for myself. Because you may ascertain that it is no more than 12 days since I went up to Jerusalem to worship, and they neither found me in the temple disputing with anyone, nor inciting the crowd, either in the synagogues or in the city." So he addresses each accusation. I didn't go to profane, I came to worship. I didn't incite, I was just purified quiet in the temple. Nor can they prove the things of which they now accuse me. But this I confess to you, that according to the way which they call a sect, so I worship the God of my fathers, believing in all things which are written in the law and in the prophets. I have hope in God, which they themselves also accept, that there will be a resurrection of the dead, both of the just and the unjust. This being so, I myself always strive to have a conscience without offense toward God and men. Now after many years I came to bring alms and offerings to my nation, in the midst of which some Jews from Asia found me purified in the temple, neither with a mob nor with a tumult. They ought to have been here before you to object if they had anything against me, or else let those who are here themselves say if they found any wrongdoing in me while I stood before the council. Unless it is for this one statement which I cried out, standing among them, concerning the resurrection of the dead, I am being judged by you this day. Okay? So, I guess the first thing I want to ask you in this defense that he makes is, what is interesting about this defense he makes? There is something very interesting about this defense. Yeah, he addressed every single point, so that's expected. I don't find that unexpected. There's something unexpected in the way he answers these accusations. There's something missing there that we would expect to be there. What is it? At least when I was reading it, I expected it to be there. Huh? He didn't say I did nothing, yeah? No, he did. He said I came to worship, and he's defending himself. What's missing? If we were being stood up and saying, defend yourself, defend your faith, what's something that you would expect he would have said in that series? Yeah, the Christ. Yeah, he doesn't mention Christ at all in that. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But I found that very interesting. He doesn't actually talk about it at all. But there's a reason for that. And so, again, this idea of when you work with God, you will walk with him, right? In the same way that when you walk with God or you work with God, you can expect to have troubles. You can expect to carry a cross. You can also expect that God will give you a proper voice. You can expect that God will give you a proper support. He will give you the proper capacity to do anything and everything. Okay? So here is St. Paul having to face this difficulty, right, where his life is on the line, and he has a very clear voice, right? I went to Jerusalem to worship. I didn't go to profane the temple. I was there to worship, not to incite violence. I didn't create chaos and tumult. I don't have dishonorable intentions. I came to bring alms. Okay, I came to give money to the poor. Okay, and he also points out very clearly that these accusations against me are hearsay. The people who are accusing me couldn't have been there when it happened that they're accusing me of. They're saying I went there to cause a riot. These people weren't there. So how are they coming in as witnesses when they weren't there? Okay? So he's just simply pointing out a series of facts. And it's a lesson for us, by the way. This is a side lesson. But it's a lesson for us, this idea of believing and acting on hearsay. Other people told me that that person is bad, so that person must be bad. Other people told me that there's a problem with that person or that way of thinking or that, without me actually knowing. And we have to be very careful of that, because that's what happened with St. Paul. But he doesn't hide away from the core of the matter, which, in this case, he doesn't actually talk about Jesus, but he talks about the way and that he's a Jew. But he doesn't hide away from this resurrection of the dead, okay, and the core of the faith. Okay, St. John Chrysostom, he's commenting on this, the way that St. Paul answers here, and he says, "Look how gentle he is, even when he's being accused to the point of death. Did you notice his gentleness in the midst of dangers? Did you notice how he kept his tongue from speaking evil? How he sought one thing only, to do away with the charges against himself, and not to place charges against them, except insofar as he was forced to defend himself." Okay? So he's not accusing anyone of anything, even though the people that came against him are breaking the law and they're worthy themselves of punishment. But he doesn't do that. He says, look how gentle he is. And not a word did he say of what he could have said, that they conspired against him, detained him, and imprisoned him. For these things can justly be said of the tribune, and yet they were not said by Paul, even though he was in danger. Instead, he is silent and only defends himself, when there was much he could have said. So again, this idea of when you walk with God, you have to function the way God functioned, right? So you can expect you work for him. We're servants here, we're Christians, we're God's, okay. Then what do you expect in that pathway that you're going to walk? Well, you can expect that there's going to be accusations, there's going to be difficulties, there's going to be troubles, there's going to be all sorts of things along that pathway. But as we said, that you can also expect that God will give you the support to deal with it. He'll give you the voice, he'll give you the tools, he'll give you the strength, he'll give you the backbone, he'll give you whatever you need to do his work, okay? But you also have to do it his way, right? You have to do it God's way. You have to do it Christ's way, which is not to throw around accusations, not to drag people down with you, not to defend yourself in a way that is nasty, not to lose your cool or your temper, not to be angry, not to try to hurt people, right? It's a very important principle that you have to do it the way God would do it. So you have to forgive. You have no choice. You want to work with God, you got to forgive. You got to be gentle. You got to be hardworking. You got to give up your life. You have to do it his way. That's what it means to work with God and then also to walk with God. And that's what St. Paul did. And that's what St. John Chrysostom is talking about there. That look how gentle he is, even when he's fighting for his life. This is not a day-to-day situation he's dealing with. He's surrounded by enemies. He's surrounded by an authority. Have you guys ever been to a courthouse? I hope none of you have never been to a courthouse. But it's a terrifying place, especially if you're the one on trial. And imagine you're the one on trial for something serious. I know, like, most of you have been there probably for, like, license stuff. It's nothing, right? They'll take away your license. They'll give you 3 months suspension or something, right? You try, please, judge, I didn't mean it. I'm talking proper judgment, that I can be put away for life. I can be put to death, right? That's what St. Paul is facing, okay? He's on his own against enemies. And he's so gentle. He's so relaxed because he says, I will defend myself cheerfully, happily. This is St. Paul, and this is the way that God functions. We said before that he doesn't mention Jesus at all, but he talks about the resurrection of the dead. And he does this, he's cleverly using his words, basically, okay? Number one, he's pitting them against each other, as we said before. So the Sadducees believed in no resurrection, as Mario pointed out earlier. And the Pharisees believe in the resurrection of the just, so good people will be resurrected. St. Paul, he is giving us something new, right? He's saying that there is resurrection of the just and the unjust, okay? That's new. The Jews don't believe in that, okay? And so this new idea obviously comes from, as Bassem pointed out, that it's the resurrection experience on the road, okay? And so he's presenting these new ideas, but within Judaism, within that ancient faith of Judaism. And so St. John Chrysostom says about this, to show how he believed in everything would take a long speech, and nowhere does he mention Christ. Here by the word believing, Paul introduces the things relating to Christ, but for the present he dwells on the subject of resurrection, a doctrine shared by them, so removes their suspicion of the whole sect. So actually St. Paul has a goal. That's what St. John Chrysostom is saying. St. Paul has a goal. So even, by the way, that's why I say, you work with God, you walk with him. St. Paul, in the moment of his impending death, has one goal, which is what? Convert them all. Right? Even if they kill me, convert them all. They're all going to be God's. So he talks about the resurrection, and he tries to teach them about the resurrection, and he wants them to become like him. And so later on in the next chapter, when I think it's Agrippa, not 2 chapters away, he's talking to Agrippa, and Agrippa says, "Oh, you almost convinced me." He said, "I would that you would be like me in every way, except the chains." So actually, he's got one vision, that I want to convert this group of people here accusing me. He wants to take their suspicion away from this Christianity, the sect. So he's doing it little by little. He doesn't hide away from the name of Jesus the whole time. He actually talks about him a lot later on. But he's just doing it little by little, cleverly using his words to reach his goal. Okay, and there is a clever use of words, because words are meaningful. It's very important we understand that the words we use are very meaningful. The way we put people down, the way we lift people up, the way we worship God, the way we don't worship God. It's very meaningful, and we have to be very accurate in our words. And sometimes the way we talk as well, the gentleness is what we said before. So St. Paul is just cleverly using his words to achieve his goal. And then the final thing that he says is that, and that's why he says, I now have, where does he say this, in which verse is it? I have a good conscience. I can't remember which verse it is. I can't find it. But I have a good conscience towards men and towards God. And I come with money for the poor, or to give. Okay? So those two things, he says, now there's a resurrection, and we're going to face the end. And there's some people who are, everyone can be raised up. And this then translates into a moral code. That there's a moral life associated with our faith. Okay? One of the strongest things about, I think, the Coptic church, our church, is that the two things go hand in hand. There's no such thing as a faith without a moral code. And that's always the way it's been. Okay? Christianity's always been that way, and our church is like that. That there's a moral code that is completely embedded within our faith. You can't have faith or proclaim faith without having a moral code, a good conscience towards man and God, and almsgiving. And I just wanted to mention quickly something I learned about this almsgiving very recently. So St. Paul has collected money to go and give to the poor, okay? And he's done this in the name of Christ. This concept of almsgiving is something new, okay? The world doesn't really understand almsgiving before this point, okay? The Roman world, especially the Roman world, doesn't get it, okay? So the Roman world, the way it functioned was everything was in classes. So you got the nobodies and you got the noble classes, okay? And what would happen is that every time there was a festival or anything like that, they would give out money, basically. Money, resources, food, whatever, okay? But it wouldn't be giving it out to the poor. It would be giving out by class, okay? So the higher class you were, the more you would get. The lower classes would get less, okay? So everyone would get something, but not necessarily you get more when you're poor. What happened was Christianity came and flipped that on its head and said, let's collect and give it to the poor, the people who need, right? That changed the whole Roman world. The whole Roman world did not have this understanding at all. The whole civilization changed its understanding of what it means to give. So now it's so logical, right? You have poor people, you give to them. You have non-poor people that don't need, don't give to them. It's just logic, right? That is something that the Romans didn't do, but the Christians introduced to the Roman world. So again, just a couple of quotes from the fathers. St. John Chrysostom says, "To have a clear conscience," he says, "toward God and toward people, this is the perfection of virtue, when you give no cause for grudge to people and strive to give no offense to God." Okay, so having a clear conscience towards men and God. Not because you're men pleasers, but because we should be doing the right thing. And St. Jerome says, "But Paul longed to give to the poor of the holy places, who abandoned their own meager possessions for the sake of Christ, and turned with all their heart to the service of the Lord." So St. Paul didn't just teach them about resurrection, but he also taught them about a moral life that is associated with that resurrection. So he taught them about both things. All right, so we'll read the last part of the chapter now. Does anyone have any questions on that so far? Very good. "But when Felix heard these things," so from verse 22, "But when Felix heard these things, having more accurate knowledge of the way, he adjourned the proceedings and said, 'When Lysias the commander comes down, I will make a decision on your case.'" So Lysias was the guy who took him from the Jews that were trying to kill him. So he says, "All right, I'll wait for him to tell me what actually happened." So he commanded the centurion to keep Paul and to let him have liberty, and told him not to forbid any of his friends to provide for or visit him. And after some days, when Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish, he sent for Paul and heard him concerning the faith in Christ. Now as he reasoned about righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come, Felix was afraid and answered, "Go away for now. When I have a convenient time, I will call for you." Okay, I find this part of the chapter very interesting. Okay. So Felix has heard everything. He says, "All right, I'm going to wait till Lysias comes." He just delays, right? He's buying time. He says, "I'll wait till he comes to give me a bit more information. I don't want to make a judgment call." You know, when someone's not confident in their decision, what do? They kick the can. You know, let's push it back. "I'm not sure yet. I'll decide later." You know, yeah. Maybe. But we'll see that that's not true in the next couple of verses. Okay. But yes, let's read the last couple of verses so we can see for sure. Okay. "Meanwhile, he also hoped that money would be given him by Paul, that he might release him. Therefore, he sent for him more often and conversed with him. But after 2 years, Porcius Festus succeeded Felix, and Felix, wanting to do the Jews a favor, left Paul bound." Okay. So you see that he wasn't so honest in his motivations. Okay. He didn't know what to do. He wanted to make some money out of it. He kicked the can. He said, "I'll decide later." Okay. And then in the meantime, he brings his wife over to, who's a Jew, right? He's Roman. He's got a Jewish wife. He brings her over to talk to St. Paul. She wants to talk to St. Paul. Very interesting. I was reading something about this lady Drusilla. There is a tradition or some history about her. Whether it's true or not, I'm not sure, but this is some of the tradition about her. That, and this is Josephus, the Jewish historian, who tells us this, that she was the daughter of Herod Agrippa the first, okay? And she was married to a different king from a different area, okay? Felix was taken by her beauty. He loved her and he wanted her to marry him. So he convinced her to leave her husband and to marry him, Felix, okay? So this, for her, would have been breaking the law on 2 accounts. 1, she's marrying a non-Jew. Number 2, she's divorced her husband to marry someone else. Okay? So this concept of adultery, they might have in their heads St. John the Baptist and what happened with him. And, you know, if you remember what happened, he's accusing Herod and you're sleeping with your brother's wife and all these things. So they might be all there. And so the reason why that story may be relevant is this guilty conscience that's inside them. You know, when we're doing the wrong thing, this guilty conscience that just eats us away is just brewing. And we blame everything on this. Everyone's looking at me. Why? Because of my sin. Everyone's aware of my dirtiness. This is why all these bad things are happening. You know, that feeling inside us? That sin grows inside us. And so that may explain why when St. Paul talks about moral judgment, right? So he's talking about righteousness, self-control, and judgment. Suddenly Felix is afraid. Why is he afraid? What's he got to be afraid of? But he's afraid. And so the explanation may be that because he knows he's doing the wrong thing. And at the end of the day, so St. Paul, this is, as I said to you at the beginning, right? It's set up as a rhetorical debate, right? St. Paul is a great speaker. This Tertullus guy is a great speaker. They're set up in a debate there to debate. You know, we've done a few debates and you've got the speakers on one side and you rebut and you rebuff and you do all these things, right? And come up with new novel arguments and all these things. Back and forth, right? But what is the core? What is the thing that actually moves the heart of people? Is it this rhetoric versus rhetoric? The core of it, the thing that actually moved the heart of Felix, that almost got him to try to get him going. He doesn't in the end, but he tried to get him going, was actually the spiritual message. It's the core spirituality. It's the things that deep inside us. It's the love of God. You know, when you're serving, when you serve God, as I said, you work with God, you walk with God. When you serve God, okay, there is a lot of cleverness that we try and bring to the table. We try and bring our initiative. We try and bring our ideas. We try and bring deep thinking and all these things, innovation to the service. But what's the thing that's at the core of it all that's actually going to change the world? What is underneath it all? It's the spirituality. It's our connection to God. It's the closeness to God. That's the thing that will change the world. Nothing else. Cleverness isn't the thing that's going to change the world. Okay? When the whole world became Christian because of these apostles, then later on from the early fathers and Saint Constantine, it wasn't cleverness that did it. It was spirituality. It was a connection to God. That's why Jesus said, "You'll know my disciples because of their love for one another." It's the spiritual things that people recognize God in, not the rhetoric versus rhetoric, the argument, logic, all that kind of thing. Okay, so what touched the heart of Felix was spirituality. Okay, and so Felix becomes afraid. And again, maybe because of this marriage thing, maybe not. Maybe there's other things, but that's one way of thinking about it. And so it says here that Felix knew about the way, and that's why he wanted a bit more time. Okay, so how did he know about these Christians? Well, we don't know. Maybe it was because his wife was a Jew. Maybe because he was governing these difficult Jewish people for long enough now to understand the things that stirred them. Because the Jewish people in those days were very difficult to manage. Okay, you couldn't mess with their temple. You couldn't mess with their Sabbaths. They had their own laws. They wanted to do things their way. They were an ancient faith and a very strong faith. So they weren't easy for people like the Romans to govern. At times they were, but at times they were not. So maybe that's what made Felix know what they were dealing with. But in any case, it sounds like he was leaning towards the teachings. So even though he had all these shocking motivations like money, right? It sounds like that St. Paul was wearing him down a little bit. But sadly, the story ends, right? The story for Felix ends here. He gets replaced by Festus. According to history, I believe that Felix was sent back to Rome, accused of all sorts of things because he was a horrible leader. And then in the end, his career is shattered. Who knows what happened to him, right? But sadly, he does not convert for silly reasons, all right? There is a series of stupid reasons, sad reasons that Felix does not convert. Number one, as I said, he procrastinates. Laziness. I'll do it later. You know the idea that I will come to confession later. I will leave this relationship later. I will do that service later. I will start reading the Bible later. That procrastination, that was what Felix was doing. He was kicking the can to deal with St. Paul. I don't know what to do. I'll deal with it later. That was one of the reasons why he lost his salvation, or potentially lost his salvation. We don't know what his end was. But just because of this idea of procrastinating, right? It's a horrible thing to do in a spiritual life. Number two, a love of money. It's very sad. You're going to lose your soul because you love money. You think this guy Paul, who's in chains, who collected money for the poor. By the way, the reason why he wanted money from St. Paul is because he wanted the money that was dedicated to the poor. That money was dedicated to the poor. He wants it for himself. That love of money made him lose potentially his salvation. Again, it's very sad. But you know, this is us. This is us, that we potentially lose our salvation for these things. Potentially, as I said, potentially he didn't release St. Paul, or he didn't want to deal with St. Paul because he didn't want to lose his relationship to Drusilla. Now, as we said before, that potentially, we don't know for sure, but potentially they were in a wrong relationship, an impure relationship, a relationship that should not have happened. And because if I believe St. Paul, right, and I follow his teachings, his moral teaching, then I shouldn't be in this relationship. Therefore, if I deal with this accurately, then I have to leave this relationship, right? Well, he didn't want to do that. So potentially lost his salvation because he couldn't let go of this relationship, right? It's very sad that I would lose something so big for something so small. And the final silly reason why he doesn't release St. Paul is that to do the Jews a favor, right? I want to make the Jews happy, right? I'll do the wrong thing just so the people around me can see me good, right? It's a very silly reason to do the wrong thing. It's a very silly reason to lose our salvation. You know, all of these things we all do. I procrastinate. I leave things till later. I wait to the next year. I wait till I'm a bit more stable for my spiritual life. I love money and I chase money to the detriment of my soul. I love this relationship or this impurity, this sin, particularly the sexual sin, to the detriment of my soul. Or I love that people think good of me to the detriment of my soul. These are the reasons, these sad reasons, that we see the end of Felix's story just very sadly closing. So, you know, we really should be careful not to be like that. And then finally, the final thing is that St. Paul was imprisoned in this time. As it says, he had a couple of years where he's gone back and forth chatting with this Felix, and Felix is doing nothing about it. Okay. In this time, there is some people believe that St. Paul actually wrote a series of epistles in this time. So Colossians, Ephesians, Philemon, Philippians, and 2 Timothy. So he potentially wrote a series of epistles that have now become canonical, now have come to define Christianity in the time of his imprisonment, where he's called back and forth for this meaningless conversation with this guy who's not interested in converting. And the final thing, as I said, you work with God, you walk with him. So you do things, when you work with God, you can expect difficulties. You can expect him to give you a voice. You can expect him to give you strength. You expect him to get you through things. You can expect to do it his way. You must do it his way, with gentleness, with calmness, with virtue. You can also expect that God will always turn everything bad into good. You can expect that in a 2-year prison sentence, that you would do things to change the world. That's what St. Paul expected. You know, that I'm going to write these letters, and these letters are going to be etched in history, you know, etched in the story of salvation. And so that's what St. Paul did. So God's work, God's word will always win the day. No matter how difficult things are, God's work will always win the day. And that's why we walk with God. That's why we work with him. That's why we do his work, because what he does is eternal. What he does always wins. It is not based on the times. It is something forever, and it always prevails. So that's Acts chapter 24. Does anyone have any questions or comments about the chapter? Or about St. Paul or anything like that? Okay, thank you for listening to me, guys. Merry Christmas. It's wonderful to see you all here. I hope and pray there's some food for you that's non-fasting. If there isn't, bad luck. You can enjoy it. There's lots of food out there. Okay, thanks for coming.
Alrighty, thank you very much, Bruno Paul. So make sure you guys join us next week as we go through Acts chapter 25. Usually Bible study starts around 7:30, so it'll be great to see you guys then. In terms of announcements, we have a couple of announcements. So youth every Friday at 8 p.m. inside the English church. If you're not on the St. Paul's youth chat or our youth chat for the announcements, please see myself or any of the other servants. Happy to add you to the chat. It's just where Bible study gets announced, youth meeting gets announced, anything that we have gets announced, so make sure you guys are involved in that. There is a barbecue after, so lucky, like Abuna was saying, is a nice feed after, so make sure you guys head outside. 2 more announcements. Ski trip. So ski trip is from the 27th of July to the 3rd of August. So we're going to New Zealand for the ski trip. So if you guys aren't aware, we're going to New Zealand for a week. And the total cost of the trip is 2.1 thousand. That's inclusive of flights, accommodation, transport, lift passes, daily breakfast, and 4 out of the 6 dinners. The other 2 dinners will go and we'll just go out together. We'll do whatever we want to do. It doesn't include merch, ski hire. So if you're going to get like a jacket, pants, something like that, doesn't include that. It doesn't include activities. So we're going to be skiing 3 days out of the 6 days. So there's no skiing on the other 3 days. So we're still going to go do activities. Maybe you still need to figure that out. So it's not inclusive of that. Lunch on the slopes, that's also not included. Extra expenses and travel insurance. So a few things that aren't included, but there's a lot that's included in that, 2,100. If you're on the list, deposits are already due, so make sure you guys have already paid the deposits. If you haven't and you want to come and you're still thinking about it, come see myself, Tony, or Abuna even, and we'll add you to the chat and we'll go from there. Anyone have any questions about ski trip? All right, awesome. Finally, last announcement is Christian Aid is every Tuesday at 6:50 p.m. That's when they start setting up. That's at Ron Moore Community Centre in Minto. If you're able to help, that would be great. They're seeking servants, especially on the 23rd as well, because St. Barb's is going to be away, I think, on their youth camp that week. So, no, not that week. All right. Well, there's one of the Tuesdays anyway that they need help. It is? Yeah, okay. So on the 23rd, so if you guys are free, it'd be great to see a lot of St. O'Brien people show up just to help out with that service. Any questions about that, you can speak to Juliet. She'll be able to help you out. Any other announcements? All right, can we please stand up for prayer? Thank you.